Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order here again this morning, and we do have a quorum. We'll come back into session, and as a point of personal privilege, as we get underway, I wanted to note with congratulations that our Commissioner Christy Gibbs, who joined us yesterday, has a new daughter who was born about a day or two after our last commission meeting. She was here virtually on the day, and I don't know whether it's true as I extend congratulations, but did you name her TACIR? Oh, isn't that sweet? Well, congratulations, and thank you for being here. Bring her with you next time. You brought her with you last time, so. Thanks, Christy. That's great. Congratulations. All right, we're going to pick up today with tab 5, and this is the TVA payments in lieu of taxes report. Interesting, you'll hear from Dr. Owen a slight downward tick, I understand, in Tennessee. Doesn't happen often, but it's a reminder. So we'll give it to you, Dr. Owen.
Thank you, Chairman. Got it on today. Got the mic on today. All right.
Yeah,
thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Commission. So today, as Chairman Orr said, I will be presenting the Commission's annual report on the Tennessee Valley Authority's payments in lieu of taxes for your approval, and you can find that report behind tab 5 in your docket books. The Commission was first directed to monitor changes in the wholesale distribution of electricity in Tennessee for possible effects on TVA's pilot by the Electric Generation and Transmission Cooperative Act of 2009. This report was made an annual requirement the next year by Public Chapter 1035, Acts of 2010. This year's report, consistent with past reports, does not recommend any legislative actions beyond continuing to monitor the annual changes in TVA's pilot. The report itself follows the same general format as last year, so I would just draw your attention to a few points of interest in the updated information that we have. So first, as in years past, we have included the latest numbers for TVA's debt, their statutory debt, and those can be found in Figure 1 on page 2 of the report. TVA's debt limit, which is set by the U.S. Congress, remains at $30 billion, as it has since 1979. And in the past, TVA has used different strategies to finance new facilities to remain within this debt limit. And some of those strategies involve TVA leasing privately owned facilities, including so-called sale-leaseback arrangements, where TVA sells a facility it currently owns and then leases it back from the new owner. And these strategies can actually reduce the pilot distribution to the state in which the facility is located, to the extent that TVA reimburses the plant's owner for taxes that they pay. So currently, however, TVA leases only one privately owned facility, and that is located in Mississippi. I believe it's in Lowndes County, the Caledonia Combined Cycle facility. And while TVA has left open the possibility that it could expand the use of this strategy in the future, it has no reported plans to do so at this time. So second, I will call your attention to the final pilot numbers for federal fiscal year 2016-17, as well as the pilot estimate for federal fiscal year 2017-18, which can be found in Table 1 on page 4 of the report. So a quick note on changes to the format for Table 1. There's a small change for this year. So following a change a few years ago in the way TVA's pilot estimates are reported, staff have now updated the table to replace estimates with actuals for the previous 5 fiscal years and also the full pilot estimate for the current fiscal year. Now, as Stephen Schoolfield from TVA mentioned in his presentation in December, the pilot is equal to 5% of TVA's gross revenue from power sold, excluding sales to federal entities and also off-system sales to other utilities like Georgia Power. And it is divided among the states based on the value of TVA power property in each state, as well as the revenue from TVA power sales in each state. And we also included this year in Appendix A an overview of TVA's formula, and that is the same overview that we received from Stephen during his presentation in December. So the numbers for federal fiscal year 2016-17, Payments to Tennessee totaled $344 million, and the overall pilot for all states that year totaled $517 million. Now, this was a decrease overall of approximately $18 million for all states from 2015-16, and TVA has attributed this decrease to milder winter weather, as well as consumers' efforts to improve energy efficiency, which both resulted in lower power sales and a decrease in gross power revenue from TVA for that year. This was the second straight year that the pilot decreased overall. However, for this year, for federal fiscal year 2017-18, the overall pilot is estimated to increase by approximately $7 million to a new total of $524 million. And Tennessee is estimated to receive approximately $347 million, which is around a $3 million increase. Now, for the state fiscal year, on a state fiscal year basis for 2017-18, because of the lag in fiscal years, state fiscal year 2017-18 includes several payments from federal fiscal year 16-17 when the pilot decreased. So the increase for state fiscal year 17-18, if you're doing the calculations that way, will be slightly less. And so still, though, it will increase. And if you're looking for distributions to cities and counties, they'll both increase by approximately 0.75% in state fiscal year 17-18. So one additional note, and I think Chairman Norris alluded to this at the beginning, for the pilot for this year, for the first time since federal fiscal year 2008-2009, the percentage of TVA's pilot, and you can see this, I think it's in the third or maybe the second line of Table 1, the percentage of TVA's pilot that's allocated to Tennessee actually decreased, albeit only slightly. And as I said, it's a pretty small change. We're looking at roughly a fifth of 1% in terms of the decrease in percentage. But I bring it up, of course, because changes in this percentage bear watching, simply because they affect the amount that Tennessee's state and local governments receive from the overall pilot. So the potential effects of a change are perhaps most easily illustrated if you look at federal fiscal year 2014-15 in Table 1. Now, in that year, you'll notice that TVA's overall pilot increased approximately $9 million from the year before. So you would expect that Tennessee's, or the portion allocated to Tennessee, would increase by some portion of that. But instead, the amount allocated to Tennessee that year actually increased by $19 million, so more than double what the overall pilot increased. And that's in part because of the roughly 2.5% increase in Tennessee's percentage for that year. So you can see that the changes in this percentage do affect increases and decreases in the state's pilot. So what causes changes in this percentage? Well, it's the two factors that TVA uses to divide the pilot. So it's the value of power property in each state, as well as the revenue from power sold in each state. So changes in either of those, or I suppose I should say shifts in either of those balances can affect the balance of the pilot. So this year, in talking with TVA staff, the slight decrease in Tennessee's percentage is most likely attributable to the construction of the new natural gas combined cycle facility at TVA's Paradise plant in Kentucky. So that increased the value of TVA power property in that state relative to others in the region. Looking forward, TVA continues to modify its power system in response to several factors, including the changing economics of power production, environmental mandates, and the plans and projections in its integrated resource plan, and it was most recently updated in 2015. In Figure 2 on page 11, you can find information on the plan changes in TVA's power system by resource type related to its projections in its integrated resource plan. And that is also expanded upon in Appendix G. That's information directly from the IRP. Also, tables 2, 3, and 4 on pages 12, 13, and 14 provide information regarding changes in the operation of TVA's coal-fired power plants related to environmental mandates and the changing economics of power production. So some of the recent and ongoing actions could affect the balance of power property across the states, and therefore could affect the percentage and overall amount of the pilot that each state receives. TVA, of course, is continuing to invest in facilities in Tennessee. So, for example, there's the new natural gas combined cycle facility that it's building at its Allen plant in Memphis, and I believe they're also building a solar power facility at that same plant. But this investment will at least partially be offset by planned retirement of the coal-fired units at Allen. There are 3 coal-fired units located there. TVA plans to retire those units following the completion of the natural gas facility when that becomes operational. Also, just this last December, between the last meeting and this meeting, December 31st, TVA retired the last 4 coal-fired units at its Johnsonville facility in Humphreys County. Looking further down the road, TVA has submitted an application to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they submitted that in May 2017 for the future placement of so-called small modular reactor units to be located potentially at a site near Oak Ridge. But even if that permit is approved, TVA has said that it's still several years away from making any decision on potential construction of those units. So in closing, I'll repeat a caveat, general caveat from Dr. Kyle, who I apologize, you're stuck with me today, not him. There, of course, is no guarantee that the pilots will go up or even remain the same from year to year, and we can see that from Table 1. So that is certainly something that governments, or for governments to take into consideration when incorporating the revenue they receive from TVA's pilot into their budgeting plans and processes. So that is my presentation, and I'm pleased to take any questions you may have.
Questions for Dr. Owen? Representative Wargo.
Thank you, Chairman. I haven't sat on TACIR for only about 3 years now, but it was my understanding the formula of how the money is distributed. Who is the one that has the authority to set that formula? Is it federal? Is it state? Is it a board? How is that money determined? Who gets how much and where it's spent at?
So I should probably clarify there are 2 formulas, so I want to make sure that I'm talking about the right one. There's TVA's formula that determines the size of the pilot and how it's distributed to each state, and that is set in federal law in the TVA Act, Section 13 and 15. And then there's, of course, each state has its own formula for then distributing what it receives from Tennessee. And so those formulas are set in state law. And so Tennessee's, I believe, you can actually find an overview of that in Appendix B in the report. And let me get the code annotated section for you, if I can find it off the top of my head. Well, come on, man.
Because you have the counties 40 plus, or you have the counties breakdown.
I believe I'm going to say this and I'm going to have it wrong, but I think it's 67.9.
To be fair to you, I would.
Is it in here? All right, I believe it's 67.9.
To be fair to you, I would do a little bit deeper for this report. But my follow-up question would be, because you alluded to the fact that, okay, let's pay attention to percentages. So if there is a decrease, so is our formula spelled out by a percentage? So that means if there's, I'm going to use hypothetical numbers. If we're spending $1 million on education in every county across the state, so that would be $95 million. And then there's a reduction. So do we reduce every county the same percentage, or does that formula? How does that formula change?
So the formula, there's several parts to the formula. So there's a base payment that is paid out to our partially retained by the state, but then also paid out to local governments.
Which I believe we heard was $55 million back in December. Is that correct?
That's correct. The total between all 3 of those, I think $51 million is retained by the state, and the rest
and
goes
plus
to
direct payment. So if you use the figure there, 341, then 344. So if we receive 341, the state still gets the first $55 million, and then if we receive 344, does the state still receive the first $55 million?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Mayor Greer, do you want to comment on that at all?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 27, the Tennessee allocation formula is on there. And I would also encourage all the members to just to see what the other states do. On the on the ATVG website, that's atvg.org website, we have the formula for each state. There's a booklet in there that was prepared by CTAS. It's very, very helpful. And I would also mention, with regard to the $55 million, that remains same since the initial thing, the state gets that money off of the top before the distribution to the cities and counties come out. Then the state also gets 48.5% of the pot before the cities and counties get their 48.5%. But there is certainly in the 3%, TACIR receives a portion of that. Also, CTAS receives a portion of that, about $2.3 million. So that first part off, if we decrease that, if we ever decrease that amount, we've got to understand we're impacting other things besides the state general fund.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor. Good discussion. To whom do we distribute? Do we do any particular distribution of this report? I know it's posted online and so forth, but
Oh, let's see. I believe it's required to be submitted to, is it state, Cliff, is it state and local in both I'm sorry, I apologize. I don't have the front material before me, but I think it's,
state and local. Okay, thank you.
okay.
All right, any other questions, comments? I'll entertain a motion that we approve the report as submitted.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Been properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? All right. Thank you very much. Duly approved.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we'll move on to tab 6. Brother Kaiser here to talk with us on the annual infrastructure needs report. And I mentioned this briefly yesterday, but this this report is very important as a sort of a baseline, a foundation from year to year where we stand on infrastructure. And I think it's going to be particularly important in the year to come as the federal government looks at infrastructure funding. I'm convinced that the fact we have this report is going to give us a little edge, perhaps, in the competition. So please proceed.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commission members. Yes, you're absolutely right. There was some news that came out earlier this week about President Trump's infrastructure plan, and there was a small draft that came out, and it's way too early to make any conclusions or set any policy right now, but the plan did mention a rural infrastructure investment plan requirement for some of the funds. And the infrastructure report here could lay the groundwork for this possibility and give Tennessee an advantage if it were to become a reality. So that was very interesting. We're definitely going to be following the progression of that infrastructure plan. So today I will be presenting a brief overview of the information on the Public Infrastructure Needs Inventory, which we normally present in May. We're getting to this much earlier now in the year. A hard copy of the draft report has been provided for your final approval under tab 6. The current report is the 16th prepared since inventory began in the late 1990s. The information in this report is based on the 5-year period of July 2016 to June 2021. And the total estimated cost of needs reported in this period is $45 billion. This is a $2 billion increase since the last inventory. Improvements needed for infrastructure supporting transportation utilities, education, health, safety, and welfare categories continue to account for most of the inventory, with changes to the total estimated costs of education and health, safety, and welfare categories being responsible for most of the reported overall increase this year. As in last year's inventory, nearly 2/3 of the estimated costs of the needed improvements reported in this year's period are not funded, though more funding will become available as projects move from the conceptual stage to the planning and design stage. Table 1 on page 11 compares the current estimated costs to the previous inventory report. Of the $2 billion increase in infrastructure needs reported in this year's inventory, more than $1.7 billion, or 84.6%, is attributable to increases in the total estimated cost for education and health, safety, and welfare infrastructure needs, continuing a 3-year trend of driving the overall increase in the inventory. Needed improvements for education infrastructure show the largest overall increase, $935 million. Most of the increase in education needs results from the $481 million increase reported for renovations to existing schools and the $359 million increase for new public schools and additions. Health, safety, and welfare infrastructure needs, which had the largest increase in each of the last two inventories, show the second largest increase in this year's inventory at $792 million. The $445 million increase reported for water and wastewater projects, including the addition of large projects in East Tennessee and cost increases in Davidson County, accounts for most of this increase in the health, safety, and welfare category. Increases in needs reported for other categories in inventory are relatively small in comparison to these. The only category where reported needs decreased is the economic development category, which is down $52 million from last year. I'll now drill down into a couple types of infrastructure types that we noticed in this year's report. Transportation needs remain relatively flat. The net increase in total estimated cost of transportation needs is only $19 million. That doesn't mean nothing happened in the transportation infrastructure community. The net increase includes $1.1 billion in new projects and $913 million in project cost increases. But these increases are almost completely offset by $1.2 billion in completed projects, $237 million worth of canceled projects, and $49 million for postponed projects that are no longer considered needed in this inventory's 5-year period. Moreover, state and local officials report $306 million in reduced costs for projects already in inventory. As you can see, quite a bit has happened. In fact, TDOT recently let the largest amount of transportation projects ever this week, and we'll be receiving updated information about those projects in July. And so the effect of the Improve Act won't be seen on the inventory until the July 2018 inventory report. Other utilities accounts for most of the increase in the transportation and utilities category. Needs reported for other utilities increased by $200 million in this year's inventory and now total $504 million. Most of this increase is attributable to the addition of $153 million needed to replace transmission lines throughout the Knoxville Utility Board's service area. In response to the recommendations in the Commission's recently published report, Broadband Internet Deployment, Availability, and Adoption in Tennessee, public infrastructure needed for broadband is now reported in the inventory as a project type of its own. As of July 2016, there are 7 broadband projects in the inventory, up from 2 last year, and now total $17 million. Increases in needed renovations, enrollment growth, and the rising cost of construction materials appear to be driving the increase in education needs. To meet the needs caused by enrollment growth and aging facilities, school systems can build new schools with extra capacity, build additions onto existing schools, renovate existing space, or use portable classrooms. In this inventory, the $481 million increase in needed improvements to existing space accounts for most of the overall increase in the education category and now totals $2.7 billion. Among needed improvements to existing space, the $500 million increase in school renovation needs are partially offset by the $12 million decrease in technology needs and the $7 million decrease in needs related to state and federal mandates. You can see these numbers on Table 2 on page 13. Some of the needed improvements to existing space are caused by the condition of the school. Although just over 8.1% of public schools, 140 of them in Tennessee, were rated by their local school officials in fair or poor condition, 135 of those schools need improvements to existing space and account for 29.1% of the total estimated costs for existing space needs. These numbers are seen on Figure 2, Table 3 on page 15. The need for new school space also continues to increase in this year's inventory, $359 million increase to a total of $2.8 billion. Although local officials reported a $14 million decrease in the need for additions to existing schools, this is more than offset by the $373 million increase in reported needs for just new schools. Of the $2.8 billion total needed to build new school space, $553 million is for 19 new school projects added to the inventory this year by 8 school systems. Of these 19 new school projects, 10 are needed in Williamson County. Over half of all school systems reporting a need for new schools have growing enrollment. See Table 4 on page 15. Of the 8 systems with newly reported needs for a new school, Lebanon, Murfreesboro, and the Gibson County Special School District, along with the counties of Montgomery, Robertson, and Williamson, reported needing an additional school instead of replacing a school where the old building is either demolished or repurposed. All 6 of these systems experienced enrollment growth from 2011 to 2016. Another reason for the increase in the cost of needed education infrastructure could be the rising cost of construction materials and labor. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics New School Construction Price Index rose 18 points, or 13.9%, from July 2010 to July 2016, and RS Means data by Gordian, an industry-leading construction cost estimating company, shows growth in square foot costs for schools increasing in a similar manner. In 2010, the average cost of a completed new school in this inventory was $16 million. 7 schools were completed since last year's report for a total cost of $173 million, averaging $25 million per school. Over the next 5 years, local officials report needing 81 more schools at an average cost of $28 million. The need for clean water in jails account for most of the increase in the health, safety, and welfare category. Tennessee's water and wastewater infrastructure is aging. Some water and sewer mains are over a century old. And as the state's population grows, especially around our major cities, additional capacity is needed. In this year's inventory, the estimated cost of needed water and wastewater infrastructure increased $445 million and now totals $4.7 billion. This increase is mainly caused by the addition of large projects in East Tennessee. The other primary cause of the increase in health, safety, and welfare needs in this year's inventory is a large increase in the estimated costs of law enforcement infrastructure, up $369 million to a new total of $1.1 billion. Most of this increase is caused by the addition of new projects located in Davidson County. Metro Nashville continues to need new law enforcement infrastructure in addition to major expansions completed in recent years. Nashville needs include a new $113 million downtown criminal justice center plaza on the old jail site, a $28 million police headquarters on Murfreesboro Pike, southeast of downtown, and a new $20 million sheriff administrative office in East Nashville. The state of Tennessee also needs $62 million for a new headquarters for the Department of Correction and $20 million for a law enforcement executive training and conference facility, both located in Davidson County. Lastly, nearly 2/3 of the estimated costs of the needed improvements reported in this year's inventory is not funded. Information about funding for public infrastructure needs reported by officials indicate that 68.9% of the funds required to meet those needs was not available at the time the inventory was conducted, up slightly from last year's 63.4%. Excluding improvements needed at existing schools and those drawn from capital budget requests submitted by state agencies, neither of which includes funding information, only $10.9 billion in funding is available for the remaining $34.9 billion in needs. You can see all this on Table 5 on page 17. The information provided is a brief overview of the needs reported in the current inventory report. If you want to see how your county is performing, please look at Appendix D at the back of tab 6. For county specifics by project type and stage of development, Appendix E is also included and has information related to school districts. The county summaries that we started last year, those start on page 23. I would also like to update you on the current status of the July 2017 report. Right now we're in the process of quality controlling the data from the surveyors, and we'll be starting on that report later this summer. If you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them. If not, then ask for the approval of the July 2016 infrastructure report. And I would also like to thank the development districts and my colleagues for helping me with this report as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Questions? Mayor McDonald.
Thank you for the report. I do have just a little deeper dive I'd like to take on a couple of things, particularly in the education area. it surprises me, I guess is the right way to phrase it, on the drop in technology needs, given how much discussion there is for the need for broadband around the state in general, and in specific, the jobs that are coming to the state primarily being, well, not primarily, a large number of them being technology-based. And so I just would wonder about that drop, given those facts, I suppose. And then the other on page 14, where it talked about the total number of schools needed and how much they cost, at a $25 million per school. I suppose that's state average, because we can't build them for that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, you know, I'll take 3 or 4 at $25 million. So
Yeah.
I'd like a deeper dive into how that figure is arrived at, and maybe if it's broken out in elementary, middle, and high school, and then whether or not it takes into account any of the proposals for pre-K that have been in existence for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a statewide average. So we have everything from alternative schools to high schools in there.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the subject of broadband was brought up again, and you had talked about that. It's interesting, focusing on around page 11, the category is transportation and other utilities, and the broadband gets picked up in the other utilities. We really need to keep a close eye on that. There will be an announcement today, by the way, probably in about this hour. As I indicated yesterday, the governor's going to announce the grant awards, the rest of the grant awards under the act we adopted last year. But it's a rapidly changing field, and something that's come up sort of sidebar about all this. You'll notice, for example, in this category, a large portion of the addition is attributable to KUB, Knoxville Utility Board's service area, because they need an additional $153 million to replace transmission lines.
Yes.
And transmission lines then get some of us thinking about rights of way and poles and pole attachments and that whole thing again. But TACIR took the lead in anticipating changes, whether it was E911, you know, as technology changes, revenue needs and resources change. And we have the same sort of thing I'm picking up on now going on with the technology advancements from cable to something else. Mm-hmm. And it's been suggested that TACIR ought to start taking a long view at, you know, some people call it cable cutting, but it's more than just cable. What are we going to do to adjust as those franchise fees and right-of-way revenues change as people dump the old technology and go to something that maybe we haven't even considered yet? I don't know if it's satellite or what it might be. But if there's no objection, sort of using this as a springboard, I'd like to ask TACIR to start looking into that. You know, probably for 2019 or something. It's not imminent, but would that be okay with everybody if they started looking at, so we can anticipate? Mm-hmm. Okay, then without objection, we'll just do that. But there's a lot of detail in these numbers, and that's why I think the report is so helpful. Other questions or comments? Yes, sir, Dr. Lippert.
I would just like to echo Dave's thanks to the development districts, our partners in producing this report, but I'd also like to commend the Daves, Dave Kaiser and David Lewis, and the critical assistance they received from other staff members, including Bob Morio, Michael Mount, and Jennifer Berry, on how much they've streamlined and improved this report over the last few years. We used to not receive this report until the fall, and now you're receiving it at the January meeting. So I think it's a lot more timely information that the legislature can use as they're considering this type of information. Absolutely.
Yes, Mayor Greer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that continues to
He's on.
Am I on now?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. One thing that continues to concern me is some of our rural counties that are having drops in enrollment over the 5-year period, from page 15. Some of them are having to, they've either got failing infrastructure in their schools and having to either renovate or build new schools. And of course, they're going to be challenged a little bit more, but fair to poor schools, we've got 135 in that category. I know the development districts work with that, but, and I represent the development districts on this, but those smaller counties, they're not going to build a $50 million school there, but building an $8 million school or a $12 million school is real challenging to them. So I think this report brings me the fact that we've got to help the smaller communities know going forward they've got to prepare themselves for doing this. I guess we're letting our schools get old and dilapidated. Is that?
Well, there's a lot of renovations going on.
Yeah.
It was over $2 billion in renovation needs, and there's a lot of construction projects being completed every year. The thing I look at is that new construction cost index and how that's gone up 13.9%, and it just keeps trending up, and that's the cost of materials and labor that are going into whether it's renovating existing classrooms or adding on to a school.
You know, in Henry County, we've got a 40-year-old high school, and we're starting a $9 million renovation on it, and that is a challenge to our community, and we're having to prepare for it, but we've got to make those renovations. So if they're putting down on their infrastructure report, and they need to be acting on it. It took us 3 years to prepare to do the $9 million renovation, and we had to certainly raise revenue to do that. And so that's one of the things that I think this report shows us across the state, that we need to be cognizant of the fact that some of the rural communities are going to have a bigger challenge, even if their school population is not growing, to give the students what they need to do to have the quality of education we need to have for our people in Tennessee. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other questions or observations about this? All right, I'll entertain a motion that we adopt and approve the report as submitted. Thank you, Representative Parkinson. Thank you, Iliff. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of adoption signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Once again, unanimous. Good job. And we really do appreciate the extra effort to make it more timely, and thank you. All right, tab 7, ad valorem payments in lieu of taxes. Back to the pilot subject. Lynn Holliday is going to present, and we're also overlapping with the continuation of our discussion from yesterday on pilots in general. But let us begin with Ms. Holliday's report. Thank you. Good morning. Morning. Make sure your mic is close there. And
can you hear me now?
No.
Okay, how about that?
Now we can. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lynn Holliday, and I am a senior research consultant with TACIR. When I came on board with TACIR back in the fall, most of the staff's work on the report on pilots was already complete. And in order to get up to speed on current issues regarding IDBs and pilot agreements, I began scouring local government financial data to try to understand at a level with which I have some familiarity. Following from recommendations in TACIR's report that pilot agreements should be more transparent in terms of the benefits being conferred as a result of those agreements, I want to highlight 2 examples that enhance transparency, not for in-process agreements, but for agreements that have already been finalized and are in place. First, in order to determine what constitutes transparency is a matter of perspective. Are we speaking from the perspective of auditors, accountants, or attorneys? Industrial development boards and local governments are accountable. They are required to conduct and submit financial reports annually. Most of these documents are reasonably accessible to the public. Businesses benefiting from incentive agreements are required to report annually to the State Board of Equalization. Payments made to local governments are reported in audits and budgets. But does that mean the terms of the agreements made between local governments and businesses are transparent? The first project I worked on with TACIR in the late 80s was related to the impact of the Saturn plant in Spring Hill. TACIR was charged with one of the first study resolutions to analyze how counties bordering Murray County would be affected by GM employees moving into the state. The presumption of an influx of workers arose from the agreement between the UAW and GM that the first hires would be laid off employees from downsized plants across the country. I'm simply trying to point out that although I have not been directly involved in any negotiations between local governments and businesses making incentive agreements, I do have a little experience with economic development projects and how they generally work. However, even I have had to follow a rather labyrinthine trail to try to make sense of pilots. Consider the perspective of the average individual, someone who understands they pay sales taxes, that some of the tax goes to their city or county, and some goes to the state, or that the property taxes they pay support schools, roads, and public safety. And they may try to keep informed about economic development activities being covered in the press. From this perspective, the reporting of pilot agreements indeed lacks transparency. It isn't that anyone or any entity is being deliberately secretive. Pilot agreements are inherently complex and can be mystifying for anyone with the fortitude to go about unlocking how pilots affect his or her community. However, good reporting practices by local governments toward transparency through voluntary reporting are emerging through financial reporting, project-specific websites, or by following GASB Rule 77. As TACIR's report pointed out, GASB Rule 77, which requires the disclosure of tax abatement information, has been deemed not applicable to Tennessee. As defined by Rule 77, pilot agreements do not constitute tax abatements because the properties are owned by local governments and are thus tax exempt. Regardless, some local governments are listing the companies and the corresponding amounts in the agreements that would have otherwise resulted in the collection of property tax revenues in adherence to Rule 77. Bradley County has benefited from pilot agreements. For 2016, the area ranked 4th in employment growth in the country, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The county directly receives payments in lieu of taxes through a number of agreements, and those payments are reported in the county budget document. State statute requires 3 elements, or 4, depending on if you have a nonprofit resolution appropriation. And that is basically a tax levy resolution, an appropriations resolution, and fund statements showing at least 3 years of detailed revenue and expenditure data for each of the budgetary funds. Let me go up here to the, see if I can get this guy to work. Oh, there we go. Let's see. I just want to put this up on the screen for you. In addition to these items, Bradley County has chosen to include pilot detail that few other local governments present in their budget documents. The Bradley County Finance Department's website provides direct links to their budgets passed in the last several years. But in a separate table here, they included in their most recent budget pilots, and they are shown to be distributed according to the property tax and reported by fund. Each amount matches the line item in the revenue corresponding in the fund statements. So for each item listed in the previous page, it ties back to each of the payments in lieu of taxes, 40163 revenue code in the fund statements, every one of them. In the pilot page, they've got listed also the breakout between the two school funds. Obviously, this money has to be shared with Cleveland City Schools. And I checked the general purpose school fund budget of Cleveland City Schools, and it ties back to that amount shown of $140,745. Many local governments report revenue under the Uniform Chart of Accounts revenue code presented here, 40163, the one that's highlighted there. In the Chart of Accounts, it's known as Payments in Lieu of Taxes Other. Jerry Durham, who is Assistant Director of the Comptroller's Office in the Division of Local Government Audit, considers this category to be a catch-all category for pilots. Revenue received from companies as a result of pilot agreements should be accounted for here in 40163, but so are other items as well. There are two other categories for pilot revenues in the Uniform Chart of Accounts: 40161, Payments in Lieu of Taxes, TVA, and Payments in Lieu of Taxes, 40162, Local Utilities. Payments in Lieu of Taxes Other, shown here, 40163, could include payments by companies with pilot agreements, but it can also include other revenues. TVA pilots here is different from State Shared Revenue Code 46851, which we discussed earlier, Matt discussed earlier. That's the formula funding. Although Bradley County has specified the source of its pilot revenue, and you can see here, we've got 7 companies listed: GE, Coke, Whirlpool, Amazon, Mars, Wacker, and Duracell. And although they specify this source and other counties do not, it's most likely due to the fact that the other counties receive other pilot revenue that isn't from TVA or local utilities, or as a result of agreements made with business. In order to make the pilots from agreements with companies more transparent in financial reporting, it has been proposed by staff to the comptroller that a new code, perhaps 40164, Payments in Lieu of Taxes Economic Development, be introduced in the Chart of Accounts that would be used exclusively to report payments received from businesses as a result of pilot agreements. A request to make the change is all that is required, and the Comptroller's Division of Local Government Audit has publicly advocated for enhanced reporting transparency and does on occasion make necessary changes to the changes to the Chart of Accounts. I'd like to take a moment just to point out something else in what TACIR staff calls the reports data. And I think I'm going to have to go back to I went through this yesterday, and I cannot.
Oh, it's always something. We're up here. We're
so
not
sorry.
critiquing your report. We're up here critiquing the new layout.
I would really like to.
And who thought about where the speaker would be seated,
Okay,
where the
well,
screen was
let's see.
located?
And I don't like touchpads at all. So let's see if I can get out of this. Please pardon my incompetency
That's fine.
here. All right, let's go. Let's try that. Thank you. Okay. It's very delicate. All right. This is what I wanted to show you. This is, as I said, this is what Michael Mount, who has churned on this data for the last year, calls the reports data. And it comes from businesses.
I'm sure where that is.
Businesses with pilot agreements are required to report annually to the comptroller's office. This is from the State Board of Equalization's website. And I just pulled out all the data that I could find for Bradley County.
Yeah, excuse me, two things. First of all, members, it's what she's got up there, I think, is on page 3 behind our tab here. And again, you're trying to interpret what's on the screen, but come closer to the mic because some of
Okay.
our members, that's fine.
All right.
That's fine.
Sorry.
No. All right.
So the thing I wanted to point out, first of all, is when we looked at Bradley County's budget earlier, we saw that they had 7 companies listed. If I can remember them, Duracell, Vocker, GE, Coke, Whirlpool, Mars. Is that 7? Here we have 4 companies. I don't see GE and I don't see Mars. And this heading where it says pilot county, those are what the businesses reported as payments, presumably. And Michael might want to correct me if I'm wrong. That the businesses reported that were submitted to Bradley County and not Cleveland, Bradley County. I'm making a distinction here. I did not find any payments in lieu of taxes going directly to Cleveland. We have a total of $2.8 million, and the budget document shows maybe a slight overlap for the time period is the reason 1.8 million. So it's off by about $1 million. The other thing I wanted to mention is that for the report on pilots that Tyler and Michael and Leah authored, they found that there's no information about when leases began in the reports. And so that information has come about as a result of TACIR's request here. And so they've been complying, it appears. I don't know if the reason that this number is off from Bradley County's budget document because there are some payments that could be going directly to the Bradley County and Cleveland IDB and none going to either of the local governments. That's a possibility. It's possible that there's some data overlap, but it's unlikely because I would guess that the overlap would only be about 6 months, maybe. Fiscal year versus calendar year is what they could have reported because we're just not sure. So that's a transparency issue, and that's why I think the budget document is the way to go to make sure we understand what's actually been agreed upon. Budget documents are the easiest financial reports to understand because they're simply presenting local legislative bodies' annual decision as to how taxes and other revenues will be spent. Furthermore, the budget document is a legal document, and that ensures accuracy in reporting. Absent sufficient staff resources to provide complex information about pilot agreements, relating the amounts of payments received and how they're used to fund services is an efficient and manageable way to enhance transparency for a smaller county. With more resources to present more complex and evaluative information, a larger local government could provide ongoing web-based information on projects such as costs, jobs created, and capital investment, among other measurements. Metro Nashville has recently created such a site, and Matt Wiltshire, the director of the Metro Nashville Mayor's Office of Economic and Community Development, has graciously come to demonstrate and discuss their new disclosure site with us. So let me see if I can get this pulled up, and we'll go from there.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Where do you want me to sit?
Well,
I think she's
you
gonna
may
have
sit
you right
here
just-
as soon as I can get
Wherever
get
you're
back
comfortable.
here. So you let me, all right. Because we have to go back to this. Okay. There you are, sir. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Get this out of your way.
All right, you know the drill. Give us your name and your title, and we thank you for being here. But just
Sure.
for the record.
Thank you for having me. My name is Matthew Wilshire. I'm the Director of the Mayor's Office of Economic and Community Development for the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County. I think I may have the world's longest title, although I've come to discover I think the length of your title is inversely related to the extent of your past. Mayor is just like mayor, right? So the long title. But it's a job I love and one I'm proud to have. And I've been in this capacity for approximately 7 years. I joined the Dean administration right before Mayor Dean was reelected, served the entirety of his second term, and then was able to stay on after Mayor Barry was elected. And so in this capacity, there are really sort of 3 or 4 things that we do just for reference of the committee, and then I'll hop into the topic that Lynn asked me to come and talk about today. So the first is economic development, recruitment and retention of companies. As you all probably know, this is sort of a project-based, typically effort. Companies are considering expanding or relocating. We go out, we market to site consultants and to those companies, and then negotiate with them and assist them on recruiting them to Davidson County. That's a significant chunk of what we do. Second is working with the mayor on sort of general economic conditions in Nashville. And so if I think of the first piece that I described to you as the harvest, this is sort of tending to the field. So things like streamlining the regulatory environment, working on workforce development, which of course is critical to economic development, and now spending some time on mass transit, which, as we know from companies that are considering relocating, having transit alternative for their employees is critically important to economic development initiatives, and so an important priority for the city. The third piece of it are just the functions that come with the job. So I sit as the mayor's representative on the board of the Airport Authority, the Nashville Downtown Partnership. We administer a foreign trade zone, and there are a variety of other functions that come with the role as director of ECD. The fourth piece of it is actually one that's taken on increasing importance as the macroeconomic conditions have changed. So when I joined the mayor's office, the unemployment rate was above 8%. It was the sort of depths of the economic downturn. And with unemployment at that level, chasing every job was critically important. As times have progressed, last month, you all may know, the unemployment rate in Davidson County was 2.5%. The 2 months prior to that, it was 2.2% in September and in October. And in those economic conditions, the priority of the mayor's office has really been making sure that every Nashvilleian has the opportunity to participate in the success of the city. And so we are working on a variety of initiatives to do that. But we continue to work on significant economic development projects. You all probably saw the news that Nashville was named one of the 20 finalists for the second headquarters for Amazon, and that is an initiative that we're pursuing, and others like it. Philips Healthcare recently announced and recently opened an office here that they anticipate will add 800 healthcare IT jobs, back office jobs. And we have, in fact, used economic development incentives as a means of helping to attract and retain businesses. And so in an effort to provide information to the public about those deals, we've created a website that's hosted at nashville.gov under the mayor's office, and then within that, economic and community development website. And I'll say at the outset, and you all, I'm sure, know this, each one of these deals is incredibly unique. There are different conditions. There are different numbers of jobs, different wages of those jobs. The jobs may be in different industries, which may be of greater or less importance to the future economic success of the city. The types of real estate that they're moving into is different in each case. The location of that real estate, what we refer to as X factor, meaning the sort of downstream benefits of that, whether it be in additional economic development, real estate development around the project, or small businesses that are supported by that company locating in Nashville. Each one of them is different. And so while I think it is important to try and have some standards to by which to measure these transactions, it's not easy to create one matrix that sort of assesses whether a deal is a good deal or a bad deal. But despite those challenges, we do think it's critically important to provide as much information as we can to the public in a consistent format so that they can assess the value of these deals to the city and to the community. So the website, and let me just, I'll pause, and I'm sure you all aren't a shy group. If anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me that. But I'll go through the website now and then answer any additional questions you have. So starts off with a map that shows where the incentives have been offered. There's a teardrop, and on each one of these you can click on it, and it pulls up information about it. I should say, and there's color coding at the bottom here, that we have a number of different incentives in Nashville. So the first is the job grants incentive. This was initially done for Dell back in 1999. The city can offer $500 per job, and that can be given for multiple years. By statute, that's only available for projects that are reasonably expected to add 500 or more jobs in Davidson County over a 5-year period. So it's really, by statute, limited to very large transactions. We have had a number of those opportunities in Davidson County, so we've been able to utilize it a number of times. The second opportunity that we have are infrastructure support, and that's where the city does things that otherwise would be the responsibility of the company to do. So a company builds a new building. By building a new building, they're required to put in a new traffic light to improve ingress and egress out of their site. That normally would be the responsibility of the company to pay for that traffic signal. In certain circumstances, the city has provided infrastructure support for that development. So those would be infrastructure incentives. The third category is the one that we're here to most, I think that you all are most focused on today, which are pilot payments. The fourth is really just a combination of the first and the third. In a couple of instances, most significantly with Bridgestone and with the new HCA headquarters at 1100 Charlotte, we did both a pilot and a job grant for the same project. And all of these are understandably for very large deals. The smallest deal that we've done where we've used one of these incentives was a project that added 155 new jobs. And that was 155 new IT jobs and was done in conjunction with the construction of a $250 million data center. So we have only used incentives for fairly significant opportunities for the city. And that being said, we know that small businesses are critical to the growth. 80% of the employment is from small businesses. And so the Metro Council created some small business incentives that are available, and I can get into those details if you'd like, but suffice it to say, they somewhat mirror what we do for the larger transactions, but for small businesses with smaller requirements. And they are set up to be much more automated. We didn't want to have to create a significant staff to administer an incentive that would have a smaller economic value because these are smaller opportunities. So it's a much more automated process. And so both the large and small deals are listed on this map. Alumpa is one of the small businesses that received incentives. Assurian is one of the larger businesses. And we have a couple of others that are on here as well that you can see. Omni Hotel received a pilot. So underneath this, we have a link to a spreadsheet or I think it's a PDF of a spreadsheet that provides detailed information about each one of the transactions. And I don't know if you can actually read this, but I'll just go through the categories with you. So the company name, the date that it was approved, the number of jobs that we either retained or added, and I should say that was expected jobs that were retained or added at the time that the deal was done, the capital investment that the company was making. If there was a job grant, the dollar per job, it can be up to $500. and then the total value of that, and then any other grants that were done, and then the value of the pilot, expected value of the pilot over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and then for the total for any that went longer than 10 years. And then the last column, a numeric column there, is just a sum of the value of the incentive in total. And then there's a brief description of the transaction of the incentive. And then the last column is an annual job count. So we go back, and as of December 31st, we're actually in the process of collecting that information now. In January and February, we go back to companies that have previously received incentives and said, okay, how many people did you have employed at this site as a measure of whether or not they've actually met the expectations? Many of these deals have to do that by statute. Obviously, the $500 per job, they have to report the number of jobs that they have in order to get the $500 per job. It just is math. And in almost all of the pilots that we have done, we've done 15 pilots since 2011. And in the last dozen or so of those, there are specific job requirements that if they hit a job target, they receive the incentive, the value of the pilot. But then there's a diminishing formula, and I can get into that if you're interested. But essentially, to provide accountability on pilots, they have to achieve at least 80% of the number of jobs that they said that they were going to deliver in order to receive the full value of the pilot. And I would say, in quite honesty, we've improved the accountability measures as we've worked through a number of these transactions. But even for those companies that don't have a requirement to disclose the number of jobs, we go back, we ask them for the number of jobs so we can provide that reporting to the public in this website. So I'll scroll down now just to show a little bit more of the functionality of the website. So if you click on Ryman Hospitalities, this was a pilot that was done in conjunction with the expansion of a water park there. The project overview lists the address, the parcel ID, so you can go and easily find it in the Metro mapping, what Metro Council district it's in, what date it was approved. There's then a link here to the actual ordinance itself. That was the ordinance approved by council, which has the dates for the legislative history, the votes, if there was an actual vote on it and it wasn't just unanimously approved, who voted for or against it, and the overall terms of the deal. There's just a summary for anyone who doesn't want to read through all the legislative language. There's a summary. In this case, 100% abatement on property associated with the water park through 2025, plus an extension of a hotel occupancy tax redirect from the pilot. So this is, we hope, a sort of easy way to describe to the public what the deal is. Total estimated value, in this case, $14.9 million. Then over on the right-hand side were essentially some of the benefits, a summary of the benefits, so the jobs that were expected to be added or retained. And then at the bottom there, you see the fourth bullet point, jobs as of 12/31/16. This deal hadn't even been announced as of that date, so not applicable in this circumstance. And then the total capital investment that was going to be made. The information that's not on here yet that we hope to add is underneath estimated value is the actual value. When we do pilots, we're having to make assumptions about what the building will be appraised for, what the millage rate will be in the future, and what that appraisal might be over time. And the only thing I know for sure is that that estimate is going to be wrong. When we approved some of these deals that were done a couple of years ago, the millage rate in Davidson County in the urban services district was 4.516%. So 4.516 for commercial property, it's assessed at 40% of appraised value. So that was the millage rate. After the last reappraisal, the millage rate in Davidson County is 3.155%. As a side note, the lowest in the history of metropolitan government. But by definition, the estimations on the projected cost or value of the assessment are incorrect because the property tax rate is much lower. Now, that property may have been appraised. The appraisal may have gone up. The appraisal may have gone down. But in general, what we have found is that the actual value of the pilot payments have historically come in significantly less than what we had initially projected. That's the good news from an economic development standpoint. The bad news is if the pilot payment is less, then the pilot payment received by the county is also less. And that typically happens because the actual appraisal of the building comes in less than what we're assuming on the front end. And we do that out of conservatism. But with that, I'll pause and take any questions that you all have about this or how we do economic development deals in general in Davidson County.
Now they're wondering, how much did it cost? Who maintains that system? Was it your idea?
You talk about the website?
Yes.
So I need to give all the credit to Melissa Gans at Metro ITS, the Information Technology System. The ECD office in Davidson County is 4 people. Me
Well,
and
you don't
3
have
others.
much going on.
No receptionist, no other support staff. But Metro IT put this all together and did a great job. I will say we looked at a number of sites around. I think Edge in Shelby County does a great job on disclosure as well. And so we tried to take some templates that we could to try and provide disclosure. And I would also say this is a dynamic process. I mean, I mentioned the one thing that we're working on adding, that we've got to work with our finance department to make sure we're accurately collecting all the pilot payments made historically. There are other things that I'm sure we should be showing, and if there are things that aren't clear or that we should be showing that we're not, or other ways to improve this, please let us know. We're always trying to make it better. But the direct answer to your question is it was just done by existing staff. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Commissioner, we're going.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm going to echo your words. It's you kind of wonder who was thinking what with the screen, et cetera. So you've done a great job with your presentation. I wanted to follow some of your numbers, but then one of the questions that I have is, what is the total? You've decreased the unemployment rate by a significant amount, which is fantastic. But at what cost? For an average job of all the jobs that you've created, has it cost the city of Nashville?
That is a really tough question to answer because of the complexity of these deals. So let me just give a couple of answers to address that. So what is the cost of a pilot payment? Out of curiosity, is it the value that you've given up? Right, so let's say that there's an empty parcel of land that's generating $16,000 of property taxes, and then someone builds a building there, a brand new office building that generates $1 million of property taxes, and we give them a 75% property tax break for a few years as an incentive for them to build that building. So now that property is generating $250,000 of property taxes. Now we've given up $750,000. But if we hadn't offered the incentive and they hadn't built the building in the first place, it would still be generating $16,000 of property taxes. I mean, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe someone else would have built something and it wouldn't have been $1 million of property taxes, but it would have been $200,000 because it would have been a smaller building. And so that question is a totally fair question. I think it's an incredibly difficult question to give sort of an answer to, because the first rule of incentives that both Mayor Dean and Mayor Berry had is the money must be but for money. But for the incentive, the development would not happen. Now, maybe we've done a good job of that, maybe we haven't. I certainly am not saying that we're perfect on that. Maybe there's some developments that have happened that have received incentives that would have happened anyway, or would have happened if they'd had a slightly less aggressive incentive, and that's a debate I think we certainly can all have. But if it's true that the incentives were required in order for the developments to happen, and the development occurred, and we're generating incremental property tax dollars, I think saying the cost for jobs in the example I gave is $750,000 in that case for that year for, I don't know, whatever, let's say it's 200 jobs, is somewhat misleading perhaps. Is the true cost of that job the cost to Metro government of having 200 incremental workers, right? There are real costs. Some percentage of those workers are going to be married. Some percentage of those workers are going to have children that will be educated in Metro Nashville public schools as opposed to in other schools or in private schools. Some percentage of them will own their homes and generate property taxes that way. Some percentage of them will live outside the county. So you know all of this, and I'm giving all the excuses up front to say it's difficult to do. We have created a number of financial models to try and project both the benefit and the cost of each one of these deals. And as I alluded to at the outset, each one is a little bit different. Someone building a business, building a building downtown is creating a whole new building. Someone moving into an existing building is taking up what's currently vacant office space. So each one's different. They're complex. At times, I sort of feel like it's expletive in, expletive out in terms of the value of the data going in and data coming out of these models. But we create some models. In general, I'll get you the exact number on just taking it at gross count, but we can go and pull up one of these. UBS was $500 per job, and they generated 1,000 jobs. So the cost of UBS is $500 a job. The cost, because we gave it for 5 years, is $2,500 a job. So we're paying $2,500 per job for UBS in that example. There was no pilot payment. Some of the others that have pilots, I'd have to do that math for you, but I can get you that answer. I should know it off the top of my head.
Thank you. And you bring up a great point, because at some point you're adding, there's no collection on that property at some point. So when you build something on that property, or the collection, as you alluded to, $16,000. Now, after that abatement, it was going to be $250,000. But would you have ever got to that $250,000? The answer is who knows. So there's some legislation that will be coming through our committee later this year that you made a very, very valid point that I'm going to steal from you if you don't mind. So if you could get me them numbers, I'd be greatly appreciated.
Plagiarism is the greatest form of flattery. So thanks for flattering me.
Thank you, Mr. Wilshire. Mayor McDonald.
Well, first of all, let me apologize for not being here yesterday. I was in a hospital bed for 2 days prior to being here, and I convinced a cardiologist I was well enough to come. So that's how crazy I am. But the real incentive are 2 grandchildren over in Franklin that I will go see when this is finished. But you are a lot like Reed. You talk so fast. I can't hear as fast as you talk. And that's the same. Reed Delberger down in Edge is the same way. He's a New Yorker, and so that even adds more difficulty to it. But I would just follow up on Representative Wargo's, some of his questioning. And I understand, and some of these, I'm just throwing them out there. You may have an answer, but for our staff, I want to be sure that they're thinking in some of these directions. So one of the points that I think you made so well is, what is the value of having an opportunity for each citizen to have a chance to be employed? You know, someone said earlier, or alluded to the fact that, you know, what we raise taxes and people assume it's going to be for police officers, and, you know, you lay out these other things, and we probably don't do as good a job as we should of also saying there is a cost to helping you find a job. And what is that number? And should it be $500, or, you know, should it be another number somewhere? And then I know in our account, right in Bartlett specific, meeting the salary requirements that we set forth in our first required papers that we do as we prepare some of our pilots. It's hard to say what that number will be, and I'll give you an example of how that happened to us, or with us on at least one account. One of the medical device industries came, and they were offering, I think their report said starting salaries at $50,000. When we went back to do I think it was the second year report, they were more like 35. And so we were faced with, okay, do we pull these incentives or claw back? Well, just on its face, based on the original language, you would claw back some of that money until they gave us the reasoning, and that was they were having to train people to do that job. So they weren't hiring people that were already ready, completely ready. There weren't enough of them. So they were hiring people with a $35,000 ability and training them to a $50,000 in about a 2-year period. And so I don't know in our forms how we get that flexibility that we need. But again, to staff, I would say somehow we have to be able to show whatever, and to our legislators, we have to be able to have the flexibility in here. And I'm always scared when you give that when you give you make the umpire the comptroller's office. That always scares me in terms of simplicity. You know, we've talked a lot about complexity, but I'd like to talk simplicity. And that's very hard to get to when you're dealing with the comptroller's office, generally speaking. So, and then, how much incentive should there be for each project? Well, it depends on the project, right? Depends on your competition. So I appreciate so much your comments, Representative Wargo, your train of thought. I just, I'm sorry, Ms. Holliday's, some of her comments talked about more resources for complex reporting. And, you know, as a mayor, I immediately went to, well, somebody's got to pay for those people. So that's when I get scared when I hear those things. And now, right now, what we do is we charge a fee back to the people that we've just given a break to. We give them the tax break, and then we charge them this huge fee for giving them that tax break to be able to afford our staff or some lawyers, and I'll talk about that in a minute, to do the closing reports. The chart of accounts and when you talk chart of accounts and Gadsby, I just gag, quite frankly. Both of those just make me sick because of their complexity and nonsensical nature. I don't know, there must be the actuaries in the basement to do this stuff. Every one of the reports that we have has a bunch of codes, language. You mentioned a while ago, you were shooting them off. Man, you're good. You know, you were calling them out, TCA, you know, blah, blah, blah. But I guess when I think about this item, Mr. Chairman, about accountability and transparency, who are we trying to be transparent to? Are we trying to be transparent to the comptroller? Or are we trying to be transparent to our citizens that elected us? I would suggest we should be worried about the citizens that elected us, but we're not headed that way. We have some of it on ours, not to the degree that Nashville does, but Edge has a lot of that information for us. But when I tell citizens to go look there, they come back and say, no, I really just wanted to know, it's too hard. You have to, even your summary there, which was an excellent summary, and we have some of those as well, that's way over the average citizen's head in trying to understand why it isn't corporate welfare. You know, that's the go-to phrase. Now, I do apologize to this body for some of my comments at the last meeting about what I thought everybody in Tennessee was doing. And the reason I thought that, where'd Antonio go, man? He needed to be here to hear this. As hard as it is for us in Shelby County to agree on anything, if we got one put together, I just figured everybody else did. But I've learned since then that not everybody else has these reports like we have in Shelby County. But I just wonder about, he said he's got 4 people on staff, but how many consultants do you have?
None.
Well, who was the company that put that together?
Me and Metro ITS.
And so you don't call them a consultant, you call them what? The vendor?
The metro government's IT department.
Okay, so it's another part of your government.
Another part of the government.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I just think that the current requirements require too many lawyers and accountants to translate the forms. We've got to get it simple enough that not only the average alderman can read it, but also the average citizen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, we were just waiting for your return. No, it's really excellent points, and this is all part of the bigger package. Yes, sir. Mayor Huffman?
You hear me?
Yes,
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me ask you, one of the difficulties in dealing with these payment in lieu of tax agreements is, and these things are like this thick, you know, when you get the contract written between the IDB and the company. But there are two schedules. One's a real property schedule and the other one's a personal property schedule. I assume that everyone does it that way to do it correctly.
Yes, I will say each of our, because there is so much flexibility, each one of these deals is different. In many cases, we don't abate personal property. We only abate the real property, but in a couple of instances, we have abated both.
So in some cases, you don't abate both classifications of property. You abate just the real property.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
In the cases where you've abated personal property, with industries, manufacturers, it's usually the process equipment, et cetera. Have you run into problems in the revenue side of your in lieu of agreement down the road when a county gets to a reappraisal year and drops, for example, the property tax rate from $4.51 to $3.10? And then you look at the personal property schedule, which each year decreases the value there. So you've got on the left side, in the left column, you've got a decrease in value, and now all of a sudden you've got a substantial decrease in the tax rate that's applied to that value on the right side. Have you run into problems in Davidson County with that number being significant to the point where it causes problems? You didn't get revenue, basically, that you thought you would get. And I don't know if it's tied to a bond for a school construction or transportation or whatever. Have you had problems with agreements that you've hammered out that really didn't come to fruition down the road the way you thought they would?
I'll knock on wood here and say we have not yet. I mean, I should say, while we have done some very significant incentives in Davidson County, it is still the annual value of those incentives is quite small relative to the overall size of metro government. So the budget for metro government is approximately $2.1 or $2.2 billion. Approximately 50% of that comes from property taxes. So you're talking about, call it $1 billion of property taxes. And we've abated, I mean, I'd have to do the numbers in my head, but I mean, we're talking about a few $1 million each year of abatement. So it's quite small. That number will grow over time because there are a number of deals that we've done that haven't yet come onto the rolls, but the baseline is also growing, as attested to by the 26 cranes out in the skies right now. So
when you have an existing industry and it's going to expand, let's say it's going to add 200 jobs, 250 jobs, do you treat the additional value that's added as a new employer and basically give that addition in lieu of tax abatement plan as well?
We have in a number of instances. I mean, I should say we do not have a matrix as, if company does X, then they get Y. Because of the complexity that we perceive earlier, we don't think that you could create a matrix that adequately accounts for all of those issues. And so it's really just been a negotiation. And while I want to tell all the companies and certainly all the site consultants that we remain open for business and want to encourage them to continue to look at Nashville, the reality is you are less aggressive when unemployment's at 2.5% than you are when unemployment's at over 8%. So we have, in a number of instances, Oberto Foods is one example. The second largest beef jerky manufacturer opened up a facility here. We abated 50% of the increase in property, both real and personal property taxes, at the facility that they occupied. It was a meat manufacturing facility. Tennessee Mountain Meats had closed. The building was shuttered. Oberto came in and made about $25 million of capital investment, and we're hiring 300 people. So I mean, in some ways that's new, in some ways that's an expansion, but it is an example of looking for the increase in jobs will abate a portion of the increase in property taxes. We got actually into some funky ones on that, but I won't waste y'all's time with it today. The short answer to your question, sir, is yes.
One final question, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any abatement schedules that are inverted, that actually start out the first year at 100% and then go to 90%, depending on whether it's 10-year or whatever?
Yes, sir. CHS is maybe the easiest example of that. Community Health Systems opened up a facility in southeastern Davidson County. I think they are probably this button, if I'm correct. But they opened up a facility that now employs approximately 2,000 people. And I'd have to remember exactly, but I think we abated 100% for the first 2 years and then 50% for the next few years. But yes, and then a declining percentage
So
of the abatement.
you don't necessarily have to follow a matrix then. You've got the flexibility to...
Yes, sir. Which, I mean, look, has pluses and minuses. On the plus side,
Right.
we very firmly believe we've gotten a lot of jobs that we've not paid incentives for, that had we had a matrix, we would have paid incentives for. That's the plus side. And it's more dynamic, right? While we're being a bit more cautious about incentives under the current economic conditions, if unemployment goes up to 8%, council will do and the mayor will do whatever they do, and I will follow their orders. But I would think under those different economic conditions, we would follow a different pattern. So that's the plus side. The negative side is the inherent skepticism that people have. I mean, if there isn't a matrix, people will accuse us of playing favorites, of cutting one deal for one group and another deal for another group. And we understand that. I mean, that is just the reality of it. I hope that we can continue to present in an open and transparent and honest way what our thinking is on each one of these deals, and that the citizens of Nashville and citizens of Tennessee will continue to believe that we're doing good deals that are in their interest. And as long as we continue to do that, we'll be given the flexibility to be able to not have a matrix. But at some point, if the critique of what we're doing becomes too loud, that may be what we're forced into. I think that would be bad for the citizens of Nashville. I mean, I'm a scoreboard guy. And while we certainly can't say the work that we've done is the reason unemployment's gone from 8 to 2.2, it's because of a lot of factors, of a lot of other things that are way beyond the control of my office or the mayor or anything else. We certainly do believe we've had a material impact in the relative attractiveness of Nashville compared to other markets over the last 10 years.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. I heard you say something about payment in lieu of for Omni, and I wonder, in instances like that, have you had any pushback from their competitors saying that gives them an unfair competitive advantage? And I just make this up, Sheraton, that is paying their full property tax. Have you had any pushback from any folks saying that you're giving them an unfair advantage?
Absolutely. I will say the grumbling has been relatively light, not to invite more criticism of us, but I think certainly there is a critique from competitors anytime you do an incentive. I think that each case we've made a case as to why we did what we did. I will say, as one note, we have not abated retail or anything even close to retail, which would probably be the most likely subject to that criticism. We did the sound waves thing that I talked about as a water park at Opryland. And we certainly had conversations with the folks at Nashville Shores about what we were doing for sound waves. We had very detailed conversations with them in advance and following the announcement, talked about what the differences were that we saw between Nashville Shores and sound waves, and about even our own, sort of competing with ourselves, right? Because there's the the Metro Water Park there as well. So yes, we have had criticism in that regard. We hope that we've addressed it very upfront and directly. And because we haven't debated retail, I think we've been less susceptible to that than other circumstances.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wiltshire. Yes, Mayor McDonald.
Maybe I missed it. How do you, with your projections and all, what happens to the money that normally would have gone to education?
This is probably an answer that Talia Lomax O'Neill, the finance director in Nashville, should give. But essentially, the way the budgeting process, as I understand it, the way the budgeting process in Nashville works, essentially, money comes into a pot, and then it's divvied out. That it's not strictly sort of sequestered for a particular use. Now, there are some funds for debt service and other sorts of things, but effectively there's enough play in the numbers, and given the relative size of the abatements as compared to the overall property tax collections in the city, that's never been anything close to an issue for us.
I can follow
I
up.
know that in a couple of instances, I'll just add, so in Omni, the Omni situation, which was actually before my time, the value of the abatement was they abated something like 62.5%. And at the time, schools funding was 37.5% in Davidson County. It's actually now about 41 or 42%. And the argument was, hey, we're protecting the schools piece, right? The reality is that's not actually how it happens. You can sort of do that, but the funds are so significant that there's enough play in the numbers that the mayor is making a decision and the council are making a decision, as opposed to dedicated funds that are absolutely pledged to this particular account, debt service or education.
Yes, sir. Nicely done. We appreciate it very much. This is has been very instructive, and these are long meetings for people to go back and watch on video streaming. But I think in the session ahead, we should commend doing so to our colleagues in the legislature. We've covered a lot of important ground related to pilots, and we're going to go back and continue the discussion we began yesterday. Mr. Wiltshire, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Great work. Back behind tab 4, we had the final report for approval that was discussed at length yesterday, and the significant concerns surfaced. I say surfaced because they've been concerns behind the scenes amongst all of us for some time. Differences between urban and rural, et cetera. The main points we want to sort of focus on are the transparency, which we've just talked about, flexibility. Nobody wants to carve in stone something that ties your hands so that you can't do the jobs you need to do. And we understand the differences between urban and rural in many cases. So equity and economy, it's all wrapped up there. And to try and get the verbiage correct in our report is the task at hand. We've had some discussion overnight about making sure maybe we draw a distinction between industrial and retail, and also making clear that the TACIR isn't recommending restrictive mandates. There's language about setting forth the systems we already have in place. They identified 3, and we've tried to consider ways to clarify that language and tweak it so that it's clear. That was on page 6 originally. So I want to discuss some of that. A couple of things we can do, and one of which I don't think we should do is to punt. If we punt to have the report rewritten significantly, thinking that will forestall some kind of legislative action, I think we might be sadly mistaken. Representative Urgo's already mentioned that there's legislation out there. We're under a statutory duty to render a report in the first instance, but secondly, even if we found a way to defer until March, I don't think that would be helpful given what I'm hearing from the General Assembly. So what I think is most helpful is that we honestly say, we have some differences, we have concerns, given what I've described, but to come up with some tweaks to the language that was proposed that could, I hope, adequately address those concerns so that we as legislators can then repeat those concerns to sponsors of various legislation. Having said that, have we circulated some, we have some copies of revisions that we might consider. I know Representative Carter can probably even improve upon them more so. But let me get past these proposed changes out. And see if they may address some of the concerns. Yeah, thank you. And as these are passed out, I'm going to ask Dr. Lippard to speak to what is proposed for consideration here in the way of an amendment. Dr. Lippard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what we've done, and as the chairman said, is we've tried to differentiate between retail development and industrial or manufacturing development, and also to make it clear that the systems that are already in place, at least in the instance of industrial, are just examples of approaches that are already available to local governments in the state in statute, and that they could pursue, and that the state should encourage collaboration but not require any of these approaches. Now, we do have still in this draft language a stick, if you will, attached to the retail side of that, but that's for discussion purposes. So what we've added is language at the very beginning setting up the distinction that says, while pilots are particularly important for manufacturing recruitment, they are generally less effective at producing economic benefits from commercial development such as retail. And then we go on, in both cases, increased use of the existing cooperative approaches for IDB pilot agreements would help local governments meet their economic development needs and preserve local flexibility in negotiating pilot agreements without undermining the tax base of other cities, counties, or special school districts. The state should encourage local governments to pursue cooperative approaches before entering into ad valorem pilot agreements with private businesses. And here we've added the language to make sure that set this out as an example. Existing approaches already available in state law include forming a joint IDB with representation of all separate taxing jurisdictions within the county. And we've added the language here to include special school districts because there was some confusion yesterday as to which schools we were talking about here, but we're just talking about the ones that have taxing authority. And entering into interlocal agreements with other taxing jurisdictions to establish criteria for any pilots that might affect shared tax bases, and receiving written approval from the city or county mayor, the city or county legislative body, and local special school districts before approval of pilot agreements. And then we've added some language here, again, differentiating between retail and other recruitment. When entering into pilot agreements for retail development, local governments should be required to take one of these three cooperative approaches for agreements longer than 10 years, or their IDBs should be required to make annual payments after the initial 10 years to the other affected local governments equal to the amount of property taxes those governments would otherwise receive for the affected property based on its assessed value. Further, the state may consider requiring that local governments receive pilot payments for retail development at least equal to the portion of the revenue that would have otherwise gone to schools. Mr. Chairman.
Thoughts? Mayor McDonald.
Just on this new recommendation, I realize that once you put the property into an IDB, it theoretically is not subject to anybody else's property tax. That being said, I guess I just want to be careful that we don't get unintended consequences. If you had a situation, and I can't think of one right off, but the ability for a particular town or city or county, but the county would be less likely to do it, if they couldn't get an agreement with, for instance, the county or the school system to abate their portion, to enter into that, is there some way for us to write it so that we're not hamstringing them from at least being able to offer that pilot for their own city? Because this assumes multiples, which I get. That's, of course, generally when a city does it, it's the county tax that really makes the difference in the pilot. I understand that. But if getting a pilot means the difference between getting a firm or not getting it, even if it could just be your own town or city, I just want to be sure the language allows for that.
That's a very good point, and that can easily be clarified.
Thank you.
That these apply in those multiple or extra jurisdictional situations. What you want to do in your own jurisdiction without impacting the others is your business. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. Mr. Vice Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I reviewed this, and it appears that it addresses a lot of the issues that we have discussed in the past several months in a manner that allows continued pilots for industrial and manufacturing, but it also doesn't eliminate pilots for retail. It just says basically what I see, that in the retail aspect of it, it more or less will require a cooperative effort between the entities, or as Mayor McDonald so well pointed out, I don't think anybody here believes that an entity should not be able to handle their own revenue, their own taxes themselves. If a city wants to abate their taxes, that's their business as far as I'm concerned, and none of mine. It's just when that it extends into a county abatement of taxes that I think the county needs to be involved, because it affects the county's citizens, and their representatives need to be involved in making that decision. And there very well may be instances where a case, and are out there, where a case for a good retail development can be made that it is appropriate to do that. And certainly, I'm not opposed to listening to that case. And if it makes sense for the citizens of the city and the county for something like that to happen, why, would certainly support that. So this doesn't prevent that. Matter of fact, it encourages that a role for both of them, and it also allows us to move forward with instances in manufacturing and industrial that a lot of the rural counties that Mayor McBride had pointed out, that's their lifeblood, the incentives they are able to offer through this program. So it seems to me to be a good step.
Thank you, Mayor Waters. This, by the way, we're proposing the language would be inserted on page 6 of your draft. The current language that begins in the first full paragraph, increased use of the existing cooperative approaches, you would strike that through the top of page 7 before increasing the accountability headline there. It just carries over a little bit. We would replace those paragraphs with what has been passed out as the alternative to the first recommendation. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. That's where that would go. Representative Carter, anything on that?
I like it.
Well, let me entertain then that as a friendly amendment. How about that? What we have before us here is okay. It's been moved and seconded without objection. We'll just, yes, Mayor McDonald. I wanted to say also, I should have done this first, where we say to include special school districts, could either in a parenthetical, just so that people who may not be as deep into this as we are, we want to make it clear special school districts have taxing authority. So I wanted to add either to include special school districts, which have taxing authority. I know that's redundant to us, but not necessarily. You know what I mean? That's the reason. It's because they have taxing authority.
Good point. Good point.
Yes, sir. Mayor
Want to
McDonald.
be sure that we're including that little caveat that I mentioned on that, in that
we will include,
friendly amendment.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Within this, as Mayor McDonald mentioned, if you want to maintain the flexibility for a jurisdiction to do only within its jurisdiction what it wants to do, this doesn't affect that. To maintain that autonomy. Well, that's good. I mean, this has been a lot of good discussion and a good change there. And you should be very proud of what you've done. This is very helpful and will help the General Assembly. Now, Mayor McDonald, you're recognized.
Thank you, and again, I apologize for not being able to be here yesterday, but I mentioned to Tyler that one of the things that seems to have been lost over the last few years our local multipliers and job multiplier, the effect of an industrial job in a community. We addressed it. He was going to look for the exact page, but not in the length that we once did. Someone indicated maybe it was the University of Georgia, but somebody about 30 years ago did one that showed that one industrial job, one manufacturing job, $1 of payroll would turn 7 times in a community. And so when you're presenting the benefit to your community in terms of, while you're giving some money to this company to produce this job, that job in turn produces 7 other jobs. That, again, that goes to the transparency of the average person to understand, well, golly, I might not be ready to do that job, but I might get one of these other 7 jobs. So I don't know why that's lost in our thinking now, and when it used to be so prevalent in terms of our ability to explain to our citizens the value of the pilot and the value of not just that industrial job, but the jobs that come with it, with the supporting industry that comes in, as well as the retail and other things needed to provide services.
Mr. Carpenter, did you want to address that?
Yeah, so I wanted to point out that in Appendix C, we show the cost-benefit analysis that is expected with every agreement, and within that, there is the local economic multiplier provided by ECD. It's the free version, as they say, and localities are allowed to kind of create their own as long as they meet some of the same standards. The multiplier effect that they have in this is 2. I understand that this was created, I think, 8 years ago, and has never been updated. So that may be different now. But we do have that in here. We have talked in the draft about that some jurisdictions require a positive benefit to cost ratio, and that often has to do with the multiplier effect. So I just wanted to point that out because we had spoken before about where that was in the draft.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, sir. Yeah, again, I appreciate the work of University of Tennessee and all of the folks who had some effort in this, but as I say, to go from using a 7 in the past, what's the thinking behind going to a 7? So I kind of goes to your point of it hasn't been updated. I would particularly be interested in how did, where's the drop from 7 to 2? What caused that? I understand we had a recession and we've had a recovery. So as we move forward in terms of seeing the benefits, our citizens seeing the benefits, again, I'm a big proponent of, I report to 60,000 people. I do because the legislature decides what we do as cities. They remind me that all the time. We exist by their authority, kind of, we put you in, we can take you out kind of a thing. But, reporting to the comptroller is one thing. My more important issue is reporting to our citizens, why are we doing these? And so I want these reports, as difficult as they are to read, to be able to at least point to certain places and say, you see this is why it helps us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all. All right. The moment of truth is upon us. I'll entertain a motion that we approve the report as amended. Thank you. Representative Carter. Thank you. Brother McMahon. Properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? That's so nice. Thank you. The report as amended is approved. We appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good work. Thank you. Well, this brings us near to the conclusion. Our next meeting date needs to be determined. Mr. McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After extensive research on this and especially with my colleague, Mayor Crossley here, and looking at our schedule for May, the first set of dates is not real good with the mayor, The second set of dates, the 16th, 17th, is not good for Deputy Commissioner Paula Davis or myself because we're both in training, and the date of the 23rd and 24th would work, but that's just for us. Is that right? Okay.
Well, what do you know? What do you know?
So,
I know,
16th,
have a little-
17th is training.
Little sidebar
But
here.
this one's not good for Betsy. That was all I was saying. Yeah.
So this was all assuming Wednesday, Thursday. What was the 23rd and 24th of May?
We're in session.
That's right.
The 3rd and 4th, is that close to Memorial, the holiday or something? The first week of May?
Yeah, no, actually, they'll be at the end of the month. So the 3rd, 4th.
How about the 3rd and the 4th? Well, I don't know why we didn't think that, but 3rd and 4th, 3rd and 4th? Going once, going twice, May 3rd and 4th? All right.
May 3rd and 4th?
Yes. You're at the end of my rope. All right. Let's do that. May 3rd and 4th.
Okay.
Good deal.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Upon further discussion and more extensive research for the summer meeting, I was also looking at the August 28th, 29th date as being the best because the September 5th and 6th is the first week after Labor Day, which is usually, generally, a bear. And just throwing that out as a
Nothing against
possibility.
bears.
Nothing against bears, but it's
It's fine with
generally
me. The 28th and 29th? We better move fast. Nobody's objecting. Let's book it. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Okay, Tim, thank you. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for your work on that. Okay, is there anything else for the good of the order? Appears to be none, and so we will adjourn. Thank you all very much.